Welcome back to Fix It to Grow It, the business podcast about optimizing your processes and the value of your people. My name is Dave Kislick. One of the things that I love about interacting with business owners, thought leaders, and developmental experts is that there are so many different methods and styles to approach the same idea. In fact, one of the best parts of my job is being able to bring different perspectives together and turn it into common understanding. And it turns out that more often than not, we all want the same outcome. We just might disagree on how to get there. One of the ways that I work on understanding new perspectives is by asking questions. Curiosity, using it to learn more about other people's ideas and to help them feel good about expressing their views. Another method is to use anecdotal or parallel examples. What do I mean by that? So that usually involves a story or a relatable experience or scenario on some other topic entirely, but something that we all are aware of, that we all know, like enjoying a well-cooked meal, or not getting enough sleep the night before and being exhausted the next day. These are experiences we've all had, we all understand. Now, my guest today really leans into this second method. He focuses on Greek mythology as a vehicle to deliver transformational change to his clients. Scott Mason, known through his speaking as the Myth Slayer, is an attorney and transformational executive leadership coach for lawyers looking to up-level their careers or leadership skills. Scott worked for 20 plus years as an attorney and senior executive in the government and nonprofit sectors. His insights have appeared in book compilations and online magazines, as well as on television and podcasts. He's a 2-time TEDx speaker, and his book, Visions Dawn, a leadership epic, retells Greek myths as allegories for leadership transformation. As a fan of Greek mythology myself, I had a great time talking with Scott about how these stories can impart lessons for leaders of all kinds of subjects like personal growth, barriers to change, and embracing individuality and authenticity. The conversation was positive, fun, and certainly reinvigorated my love of story and how story can teach us about our worlds and ourselves. Maybe it'll just be the boost that you need to conquer the mythical beast standing in your way. I hope you enjoy it. And welcome, Scott. Thank you so much for being on the show. Super excited to talk to you. As some more background for our listeners, we actually recently connected again at a National Speaking Association event in New York City. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I want you to begin just kind of introducing yourself. I gave a little bit in the intro, but tell the audience who you are, why you're here, what is it you do?
Thank you. First of all, I'm excited to be here, and this is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a long time. I am the Myth Slayer. It's my belief that Greek myths are the most powerful leadership and professional development transformational tools that have ever been created. And I'm determined to use my history as an attorney, as a former executive, as well as a speaker, podcaster, and coach to share the word about what they can do and be the vessel through which these stories transform lives, leaders, and organizations at a time when the entire way that we think about leadership, organizational development, personal growth are shifting. I'm proud to have that role in this world.
All right. So before we even talk about any of that, I'm going to say one of the things that I love is how just up you are about the topic. I've noticed this when we first met at a Toastmasters meeting. I've seen this on your YouTube channel. We'll put that in the description for everybody as well, so they can go check you and your content out. But it is something that I've noticed in everything you do, either on stage or on screen or whatever. Very upbeat, positive. I love seeing that because it, I think, draws people in, and I try and also do a bit of that myself. But let's go into some of the things that you mentioned. There was Greek mythology, transformational change, executive and lawyer roles. First of all, from those different roles and leadership positions, what's the biggest change that you've made in your time that has had, in turn, the biggest positive effect, whether that's on your business, your personal life, a team that you have managed? Just what was the biggest change and the biggest effect that that change had?
That's a surprisingly deep rabbit hole
Well, you're talking
possibility
transformational change. Come on.
of a question. I will say that the biggest change has been when I began to understand what my mission, my unique mission on this planet might be. Number two, began to engage with it. And number three, when I began to truly step in, scared as I've been sometimes, to that role and own it, even though I know I might face critique or naysaying or all those sorts of things. Once I've been able to do that, I've been able to tap into my own inner power. And that's really been the source of that inner well of positivity and joy that I bring into all of these conversations. I'm so glad to hear you say that. There's nothing more that I ever want for anyone than to be able to similarly feel that sort of true, deep inner connection with their highest self and then be able to manifest it outward in the world. You're right. My goal is for it to attract people, but it's a goal that I want for everyone because there's this sort of inner beauty and power within most people that aspire to be leaders, and they can really amplify the positive change and impact that they can make in the world if they choose to really go hard with that.
Okay. So there's so much that we could unpack there too. But the positive message, again, comes through loud and clear. I'm interested in how this relates to transformational change and the moment that you had that, what I call the aha moment, where you said, oh, this is what I should be doing. What was that discovery as a thing? And what was the moment surrounding that discovery?
The moment surrounding the discovery, why don't we start with that? It goes way back. When I was 9 years old, I grew up in the backwoods of Kansas. Yeah, so that's going way, way, way back. I grew up in the backwoods of Kansas. We went on a vacation to the big city of Denver. And I had a grand total of $15 with me. That was my spending money. And my parents and I went into a bookstore in the downtown area. And next to the cashier's desk was a table. And on it, there was propped up something called Larry's Book of Greek Myths. And it was a fully illustrated children's book of Greek mythology. And on the cover was the god of the sun, Helios. And he was in his chariot flying in the sky, radiating everywhere. And beneath him were like nymphs and satyrs dancing around and having a good time. And I remember being thunderstruck by that. I spent $12.99 of my $15 on that book that I still have to this day. And in one way or another, that image of Helios and that character that I read about in the book over and over and would follow everywhere I went and try and learn as much as I could about. Helios was the model of the Colossus of Rhodes, by the way, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And that also struck me as I learned about it. That sort of began to serve as almost like a North Star or an inner light that guided me. As I learned more and more about Helios, I began to think, okay, well, this is why this particular character lands with me so much and what it can mean. Although a lot of that was a mystery that took me many decades to truly accept and uncover. Now, I spent nearly 20 years practicing law and being a senior executive with the city of New York under the Giuliani and mostly the Bloomberg administrations. Then I was general counsel and head of operations for the country's largest domestic violence shelter provider. It also ran some homeless shelters too. And after that, I went into a manufacturing business. I took a radical career turn. And each step of the way, I felt I was moving more and more towards what I should be, but I wasn't necessarily moving more and more towards who and what I am. And so eventually I had a business divorce from the business partner that I had with that manufacturing company. And I decided this is my time to figure out who and what I am and be that person. I initially got a roster of clients as a coach and a consultant and went with them. But pretty soon, I figured out that my heart wasn't in it, and the ability to attract clients was reflecting that. And so I spent a lot of time going into a deep internal dive. What has caused me to move forward in my career? What have I aspired to? What is the root of my hopes, my dreams, my aspirations? What can I possibly be and what represents that? And what have been the themes that I have carried with me ever since I was a little boy? And so there was a whole host of exercises that I went through, a whole host of deep thinking, a whole period in which I was burrowing underground and caught in a labyrinth of caves of self-doubt and confusion. But eventually I began to understand that the common theme in my life, when I spoke, when I would talk to people, when I would read, was exactly what is the overall theme of my coaching and speaking and podcasting for that matter, Greek myths. Why did they matter to me? Because, like I said earlier, they are the strongest transformational tools ever written. They provide guideposts for people to change. Homer, Hesiod, these ancient storytellers, they didn't just retell these myths because people had nothing better to do. Heaven knows they had a lot of other things to do. They were sharing in a dramatic and exciting way the hopes, aspirations, expectations, dreams, fears of an entire society. And these stories captured that with such richness that they became world myths, world stories, stories that resonate thousands of years later. But what are cultures? They are merely the collectivization of individual hopes, dreams, aspirations, statements of possibility. And when I understood that, then I began to ask, well, why does this really resonate with me? What can I do with it? And that began the path that took me to where I am now and took me to get to meet amazing people just like you, Dave. Just keeping it real.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm going to avoid the topic of Greek myths for one more question because you talked a lot in that answer about your own transformation and your own realizations of what you should be doing. And I feel, first of all, I feel a very big kinship on a number of levels. I too had a very big book of Greek myths at about 10 or 11 that I reread almost every year. And I too have gone through a number of different, not full-on career changes, but big transitions in my life on the career path. And what I want to get deeper in on is what really is transformational change. I could understand someone listening to your answer just now, and anyone in the audience, you're watching, you're listening to this, if you have that reaction, I'd love to hear this. I heard this too, that you discovered more about yourself in this transformation of self rather than anything about your work specifically. So let's really define transformational change here. What is it in your eyes? And how do you work on that with your clients or audience? Or how do you present transformational change? Again, not focusing on the Greek myth aspect, but just what it is.
Human beings are not hive species. As a matter of fact, the attempts historically to turn us into hive creatures have generally not succeeded, and they're not known for bringing out a lot of creativity and self-actualization and a sense of joy in their populations. Why do I reference hives? Because a hive mind is one in which individuality is completely sublimated to the need of the overall group, species, or whatever collective that each individual mind is a part of. Humans are heavily wired towards individuality. Now, that may exist within various different degrees, but think about how we each primarily recognize each other. It's not through scent, it's not through body movement. It might be to some extent, but it's through our faces, which have had, except those of us who have beards like you and me, we've had the hair removed from it that our ape ancestors have covering it. We recognize each other by our faces, which are highly individuated. Think about even how we, if all else fails, identify each other through our fingerprints, which are highly individuated. And so when we're talking about transformation, what I'm talking about is engaging with whatever blocks you have to the full expression of that individuality. Then, once those blocks are removed, creating by tapping into yourself, as well as connecting it to the skills and experiences and the environments that you are in, as well as the things that you will not sacrifice to how you are presenting in the world. Integral to that is a combination of two different factors that are very difficult for people to sometimes figure out. But once they do, that door to complete self-expression is unlocked. Number one, purpose. In other words, what is your unique reason for being in the world that is not just about you, that is connected to something bigger, as well as your inner truth values, not just the values that we sit around and reflexively iterate over and over, but those that are true and unique to who and what we are at our highest selves. When we begin to pull all of those things together, in other words, when we fight the myths or the inner stories that are keeping us from being fully expressed, and then we do that inner work to rewrite a framework for who and what we can be, a vision for our future emerges, and then we develop a pathway or a mission to get there. That process, until you get there, is the transformational process. Now, I do believe transformation can and should be continuous. Nonetheless, I also believe that it's not generally just a nonstop journey, that there are achievements that you have, places that you step into in which you are more connected with that full expression. And maybe you want to experience that for a while, but then a new leg of the journey begins. And that goes as to then how and why many careers, particularly of those that are creative or those that are out of the box or highly individuated, go through a lot of different iterations. The journey ends, but then it's time for a new one to begin.
So I really love the discussion about individuality, especially at the beginning of that answer where you talked about how we recognize each other.
Yeah.
And throughout this idea, it resonates not only with me just because it does, but also because of everything that I've talked about on this channel. In fact, in an earlier episode, I had a conversation with a gentleman, Robert Schlenner. I think it's our second episode on the channel, where we talked about you have to treat people as individuals. And I think that is now the parallel to the business world, where transformational change becomes not only necessary, but really a key factor in making things better in a group. Because if we are all individuals, we cannot be all given the same treatment. We cannot all be given the same actual answer for whatever the question is. We have our own ways, methods, likes, dislikes. all of that. And as you mentioned, recognizing that is not just key. There needs to be a stronger word. Paramount. It's integral. It's so important to actually getting someone's buy-in, to getting a more productive day of work from that person, to having them be a happier employee, to feeling like a part of the group rather than just alone. Because that's the other side of this. As individuals, we end up being, I think, alone a lot of the time, especially in technology in today's world and yada, yada, yada. But I think that change that you're talking about helps actually bring us together as individuals in a weird way. So I really like how you describe that aspect. And now I want to let you bring the Greek myths into it. Go ahead. You were about to say.
No, please finish your question.
Okay. With the understanding of what transformational change is and how you look at it as a service that you provide and why it's necessary in the world, how do you tie in the Greek mythology as an allegory for that? And more specifically, what are the biggest myths that we all know that really resonate?
Perhaps I'll start with the second question or second part of the question because it lays the groundwork for the first part. That being said, I want to just going back to something that you said earlier, I feel a point really needs to be reiterated. What you're talking about with regards to the need for recognition of the individuality of every human being within a leader's orbit is all the more important now. In humans' collective journey, there was a time and a place in which, and we'll never really know, but it's at least arguable that individuality needed to be downplayed because the state of technology and the way the industrial revolution in particular played out required people to some extent to become more fungible and sort of tamp down, particularly at the sub-leader level, their individuality and more or less act as widgets. But we both know, and I'm sure your show covers this extensively, that era is coming to a close as AI, robots, and a whole host of other new technologies are replacing a lot of this fungible work, and people are going to either be able to fully step into their individuality and be utilized that way, or I hate to say it, but their ability to be viable members of the workforce may not necessarily be sustainable. And so then let's talk about the things that hold people back and keep them from being able to truly step into their individualities as members of the workforce. I would argue that there are 5 main stories that people tell themselves that are, yes, I tried to avoid using the M word, but I call them the toxic myths. There are genres of Greek myths that actually tie into or are allegories for the individual stories we tell ourselves that keep us from being able to fully connect with who and what we are. These 5 types of stories are as follows. Number 1, the tragic origin story that who I am, what I am capable of becoming is purely the product of my birth or the circumstances of my early life. Number 2, the social story, or the social myth, which is that who and what I am destined to become is driven by social expectations. All of my family members are lawyers, and so therefore I will be a lawyer. Or my culture expects me to join the military, so I will. Number 3, the ritual belief system or the ritual myth. The ritual myth is one in which you have maybe come up with a internal belief system that worked for you in a place and time. And so you ritualize it into your behaviors, but then it becomes ritualized to such an extent that you can't see out of it. And therefore you are caught in behavior patterns that are just merely or personal narratives that are repeats of the past, even if they no longer serve you. Number 4, the doomsday mindset, which is one of cynicism. Everything that I do is going to lead to failure. Or if I make a change in who and what I want to be, or if I veer from expectations of any sort or whatever narrative I'm telling myself, the end of the world is going to occur. And number 5, the underworld mentality, which is marked by a mindset that is trapped in mental, spiritual, or emotional despair. Unlike the doomsday myth, in which you can at least imagine a future that is not a doomsday, the underworld story is one that is purely dark and always will be, no matter what, and always has been. So long as you are stuck in any of those mindsets, you're not going to be able to engage in any sort of transformational process, and they're going to be keeping you locked in a place that is suboptimal from a leadership perspective, from a transformational perspective, or from the perspective of anyone that wants to bring a sense of resilience, creativity, or connection into the life that is that you're experiencing.
So I'm having a chuckle
Yes.
because, first of all, when you mentioned the second myth of societal pressure, I haven't told you this before, but I actively avoided following in the footsteps of my mother for quite a while in my life. And now I end up working with her because it is actually the right place to be for me. So I'm laughing at that because I actively pushed against that second category. And jumping to the 5th of the underworld, I love that that is the downward spiral. That is the, I can never get out of this hole. And I think everybody will completely understand all 5 of these. They make total sense. What would you do to use these 5 examples when you're talking with either a client as you're coaching them through transformational change, or just as you're speaking about the topic? How would you use these in a real world way to help someone go, oh, I can change that, or I can get there, or this could be better, something of that nature?
Who and what we are in the world are driven by our internal narratives, past as to what created us, who we were, present, what we are, and by implication, what we will become. So the first thing that I would do if you were my client, or if I were speaking before you in an audience, is lead that individual or those individuals to a place of acknowledgement that the narratives that we tell ourselves, A, we create, but B, ultimately drive our personal and professional outcomes, either to a place that's optimized or successful or happy or fulfilled, or away from it. Once we acknowledge that we are experiencing life as a narrative, then step back. Well, what are the genres of narratives that you're telling yourself? Now, you may be telling yourself some positive ones. I want also people to acknowledge what the positive ones are. So as we're going through a transformational process, those positive ones are elevated while we deal with the negative ones. So step number 1 is acknowledging that the narrative construct, or the narrative structure, ultimately dominates the pathways of our life. Number 2, then looking at the narrative genres that we're telling ourselves. Then number 3, looking at the toxic ones in a lot of detail. Well, how are they playing out? What caused them to be there? Admitting that they are just stories. They're not just some wholesale objective reality. And then imagining what life would be if those were replaced by narratives that were more positive. Once the client or the audience I'm speaking to is able to get to that place, then we take the final step, which is to A, literally burn those toxic myths, B, close the book on this particular storybook of your life and open the door to a new one. And that's when the second phase of the transformational process begins, which is, as we mentioned a little earlier, writing a framework for your future, creating a vision from which a mission that guides you evolves, and then going on it so you can live life, as I would say, like an Olympian.
Now, this step one is what I want to focus on for a moment, because a lot of people talk about that kind of self-realization turning into self-actualization, talking about the way we change our mindset, or recognizing in the first place that we have a mindset that may need changing. Do you find that the use of Greek mythology as an allegory, as an example, is easier for people to digest than simply being told you are creating your own problems in your mind? Because I find a lot of people, I'm sorry, but I find a lot of people can't hear the directness, but can when it's through some sort of technique, motif, theme, whatever you might call it. So what do you find in that?
Dave, you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. It is always easier to see yourself if you are able to identify with a story that, by the way, in this case, has been shared by millions of people around the globe for thousands of years, than to just have someone single you and your mindset out. That can make you feel diminished. It can make you feel alone. It can make you feel ashamed. It can make you feel a whole host of other things. But this connects the narrative that you have been telling yourself, or the narratives, with something that's larger, something that's universal, something that's part of the human experience. And not only that, but it connects you in that story tradition with a narrative through line that inevitably leads to a positive outcome that can take you somewhere. Every single hero that has a happy ending in Greek myths, in one way or another, was struggling with one of the 5 toxic myths, the myths within their own myths. And so, yes, it's a lot easier to hear about it if we're talking about Achilles or Artemis than if it is Scott Mason, Scott Mason alone.
Oh, by the way, we're getting Mythception trademarked at this point. So just, put that on the books.
Okay,
good. but yeah, okay. I'm glad you agree, because I had the realization as you were talking about it. But now that we understand what I'll call the psychological aspect of looking at transformational change, having a methodology, aka this mythology, as a way of analyzing it and becoming self-aware of it, how does that apply in today's business world? We talked a little bit already about how things are changing, where AI is coming in. And yes, you're right. I have mentioned it on other conversations on this channel as well. How it's changing the workforce, the focus of work, also how we as people are changing as a society, becoming both more isolated and more globalized simultaneously. So in the modern workforce, how does this transformational change really get applied in an operational sense? And then the goal of that being what? Because now we're talking about a team, not just the individual.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with very easy first. I would say that the core transformational outcomes that can be applied in a business setting all relate to resilience, creativity, and connection, which I think I mentioned earlier. Let's start with connection. AI is what it is. Technological advances are what they are and will be what they will be. But you just hit something right on the head. People are around more and more people and connecting with each other, and also connecting with each other in all sorts of ways, but they nonetheless feel more and more alone. Additionally, as there are more and more avenues for people's missions, their work, or whatever, to be exposed in the world, there is an exponentially more and more crowded marketplace of ideas and thoughts and expertise and just noise that everyone gets exposed to. How do you cut through that? How do you galvanize the people and the resources around you that you need to stand out if you want your mission, your message, or your team to be acknowledged, heard, and to be able to push forward? How do you attract those that can help you, like vendors or external stakeholders, investors, things like that? The way that you do all of those things is by being able to ignite your inner charisma. So if you understand who and what you are, what your purpose is, and who you are there to serve, and have that overall mission, the overall vision, and a clear mission to get you there, then what you're able to do is very naturally, I would almost say without trying, connect to the charisma that you need to stand out and make real connection happen. Because people see you. You said at the beginning of this hour, right, there's this upness or there's this energy about me. What is that? I'll be immodest for a second and at least argue that that's charisma, and people find it attractive. So if for no other reason you want to go through this process, it optimizes your ability to have impact in whatever way you want to. And I have never met a leader or anyone in business who says, oh, I want to have no impact at all. I would prefer to just be completely forgotten and erased as if I never existed in the world. It just doesn't happen. And if it does, please, you don't need a coach or someone like me. You really do need professional help. So that's number one.
So,
then,
well,
yes.
So okay. I want to take that a step further before you go on to another topic within, because the idea of knowing oneself and making yourself therefore more attractive to other people in a charismatic way, I would ask the audience to consider, how many times have you been excited about talking with someone or excited about getting to meet someone again after an initial because of how much they clearly are comfortable in their own skin, how much they are authentically themselves? Don't you want to work with that person? So as an individualistic sense of self-promotion, you will probably go farther in your career. As a leader, those are the kind of people that are able to get past their own hurdles, their own whatevers about who they are, and focus on the work, and will actually produce better as happier people. I keep coming back to that as well, because that's, for me, Scott, a big focus of improving the workplace is understanding how we work together and being able to do that better.
Adding on to that, by the way, a core leadership skill in group settings is motivating your staff. And charisma helps you do that. Now, charisma is highly individuated. Not everyone is going to be like Scott Mason. Yes, I know I'm a little bit over the top. That's who and what I am. People can have a quiet charisma. They can have a whole host of different ways that they present. But if it is authentic and true and coming from a place of a message, again, that is bigger than that individual and me, then the connection that charisma can bring about all of these positive outcomes very much is a reality. It's always better to be someone that is able to command attention for a positive outcome than someone who's not.
All right. So I am really enjoying this conversation, but at some point we have to come to a close. So we're going to shift gears now. We're going to switch over to the Fix It 15. Again, if you're new to the channel, you haven't seen any of our episodes before, this is where I get to turn the tables on my guest and maybe provide a little insight or help into a subject that they are looking for assistance with, that they want a little more understanding on when it comes to growth, success in business, operational or sales goals, any kind of stuff related to what we do. because sharing is caring. We help each other out.
Yeah.
So I'll start by saying thank you, Scott, for all of the insight you've given us on what transformational change means to you and how you approach it. What are you looking for help with?
First of all, what a unique and creative twist. I would consider that something that kind of makes this podcast epic. Now, what am I looking for? Neither of us will deny that my approach and my methodology are unique. I think that's a superpower, but it comes with challenges. I am out there attempting to share with the world my message about the power of these stories and how it can help them become, how it can help individuals become more charismatic, become greater leaders, have their teams be more resilient, creative, and connected. But because it's unorthodox, because it's a new way of thinking about because it's really bringing together two topics that seem like they might be utterly unrelated, messaging it in a way that immediately captivates people is a bit of a challenge. I use Greek myths or I will help you become a stronger leader, a leader worthy of Mount Olympus, and have these transformational outcomes using Greek myths. People may look at me like I'm crazy. So talk to me about how that can be messaged in a way that is more mainstream, or that is, that really grabs people and makes them say, I've got to learn more and become part of this.
Okay. Immediate answer. Don't be more mainstream about it. The whole idea of individuality and of your individuality and presenting yourself is so key because, first of all, do you want more people to pick you up and follow you if they're not the right kind of people for you? Now, I'm asking this not just for you, but for everyone out there, especially if you're a private practice consultant, coach, anything of that nature. If you, or even a business owner, if you want people to join you on whatever journey you're going on, they should be the right people for you. So by being yourself, you're already ensuring that you'll get the right people for that. Now, how do you kind of open more people's minds to that possibility? Instead of being more mainstream, I would say be more common in your language at the beginning about being unconventional. And I use that word specifically. It was, in fact, at the National Speakers Association, New York City chapter open house that we attended. I think this was last week, even.
Yeah.
I heard a specific person introduce himself as an unconventional speaker. And at the table, I asked him the question, why did you say unconventional? Because that stood out to me. What about you is unconventional? And we had a discussion about the difference between unconventional versus authentic in a way of describing yourself. And I'm going to say that in your case, because you present as authentically you and unconventionally, use words that would trigger people's curiosity in your opening, like, I'm not your average. I'm not the cookie cutter. I am not a one size fits all. Half of you are not going to like me. Throw out a challenging statement like that, and people will go, wait a second, what's going on here? And then you have them drawn in. Now they're actually interested in listening to the next aspect. And that's when you become, okay, I'm the myth slayer. What does that mean? I want to know how I'm not going to like you. So far, I haven't heard anything I don't like. All of that is methodology just to draw their interest in. And then you've got them for the rest of the talk, for the rest of the session, whatever it might be. And they're not thinking in terms of, do I like this person? Do I agree with who they are as themselves? But do I really not like them? No.
I absolutely love it. One of the things that plays into is that there's a fundamental truth in what you're saying about the way I present, which is that actually half of the people do hate me. I've done a couple of TEDx talks, and the feedback I've gotten on those has either been, these are the best TEDx's I've ever seen in my life, incredible, or I hate this. Do not torture me by making me watch this again. And stepping into that is something I have learned to be comfortable with, but then taking that to another level in terms of not just my internal reactions to these sorts of things when I hear that, but saying, okay, let me be out there. That's actually really helpful advice. And not only that, I think that will help a lot of people who are not able to stand out and be fully charismatic, as we talked about a few minutes ago, because they have not really embraced exactly what you're talking about. And I appreciate you sharing that.
Scott, all right, you're welcome, but I have to add to what you just said. I want to change a word in there.
Please.
Who are not comfortable. Now I actually forget the exact word you said about stepping out and being out there. Now I'm going to bring back the authentic self. Instead, I would say someone, especially someone who's getting in front of a camera, who's getting in front of an audience, who is somehow publicizing their persona, whether for a business purpose or just in conversation. You go to a party, you're going to see people you don't know. You're out there in public. I wouldn't say it's about presenting yourself in a certain way. It's about, again, like you said, being comfortable in your own skin. That's part of the transformational change.
Yeah.
So I want the people who are hearing, watching, following this to take away that if you are comfortable in yourself, you will do well. So how do you become comfortable in yourself? You recognize that there are going to be people that don't like you, and that's okay. And recognize that you do have a niche. You do have an audience. You do have friends. You have people in this world who you can count on and who love you for whoever you are. I know we're going motivational now, but but it's true.
That matters.
Yes, it matters.
It does.
And because of that, as long as you can just accept that from the world, step out, be who you are, and you will ultimately be more successful in your own career path, with the company that you're working, as a leader, and getting your team to follow you and follow your vision and your excitement and motivation. So I think we are extremely aligned in this. And the interesting thing that I'm noticing is the different way that we're describing it with language. And I'm coming back to my answer to you about how to be more drawing in at the beginning. It really comes down to language. In fact, I think I'm just developing a talk of my own as we speak. The way that you say things matters almost just as much as the what. So there's my answer to you. Focus on the first 3 sentences as being universally understood language that makes people question, that makes people go, wait a second. And then transition to, I am the myth slayer. This is who I am. This is why I care. And then you've got them hooked.
I love it.
So that's our Fix It 15. And that's really our episode for today. So first of all, Scott, thank you so much for doing this. Wonderful conversation to have with you. It's been a real treat. And I want to give you a chance to plug all of your stuff. We're going to throw links and descriptions and everything into the bottom of this episode, but please tell us, where can our audience find you, follow you, listen to your ideas, or even work with you?
Above and beyond all else, go to myfreedomrocks.com. That's myfreedomrocks.com. As you said, all of the other social media, YouTube, those sorts of links are below. I'm not going to repeat them now. Myfreedomrocks.com, because I want your freedom to rock.
All right. Well, Scott, I hope everybody got something good out of this one. I certainly did. Again, thank you so much. And I hope to see you very, very soon.
Oh, yes.
It really is amazing how myths and stories from many different cultures and backgrounds all give us plenty of lessons to use as humans. On top of that, we should recognize that as individuals, we have our own pathways to success. We don't need to follow someone else's guided method in order to achieve. Now, I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with Scott and got some takeaways that you can use to help transform your own leadership style. And as always, I'd love to hear from you, whether it be reactions or recommendations for new episodes or guests, or if you want to learn about how to improve your own operations and sales processes and give your team the support it needs to achieve. I'll see you next time.